Hey people, it's Teo Gamer with a video I'm hoping will help people rather than have them spend more time arguing back and forth with each other about who's right or wrong, all because somebody interpreted something differently than everybody else did. So I'll be using Cadence as an example in this video in the statement of when used as your default weapon attack to show people that just because you're interpreting something a different way than somebody else doesn't make you right or wrong. But if you don't use the context correctly, or you take something out of context, then the interpretation that you're reading is going to be incorrect. So the interpretation can be right, the context can be wrong. So I just want to clarify that I didn't make this video to start a problem or to harp on the subject or tell anybody they're right or wrong. I'm just simply showing you that an argument could have been avoided if people had simply stepped back and stated, well, wait a minute, yeah, that is worded fucked up. Oh, I see what you're getting at. Or, I don't understand that. Can you please explain that to me more? Because that's more healthy than sitting there taking up a forum, bashing each other when other people could be using it to get help. That's all I'm saying. So let me get right into this. And in order to make a good comparison to this, I'm going to be using an example from a game I used to play called Dragon Dice that has a rule in it that's worded just as fucked up as this, as the description in Cadence, that people were actually arguing in the same manner people are arguing about Cadence on. And so getting right into it, the game I used to play is Dragon Dice. Now, it's a dice rolling game, and there were units. Each individual dice was a unit, and units made up an army, and you can have an army as pretty much as big as you wanted. And the objective of the game was to space it out. It's like Risk. You space out your armies and you take something over. Now, there was a safe haven in the game that you could place your units and or your army at called the reserves. Now, in the game, there was melee, ranged, and magic, and a few things. But the ruling that I'm going to talk about is the ruling for magic on the reserves. The ruling stated you can't cast magic at the reserves. Now, most people wouldn't think that's a problem, but the fact of the matter is there are two different interpretations of at the reserves. That means their interpretation number one is what people were interpreting at, is that the units that were currently in the reserve can't cast magic. While the other interpretation that people were arguing against was there was outside sources that could cast magic to the units that were sitting in the reserve when you're in an enemy. So both sides were trying to convince the other side that the other was right. But even though both of them were right, in the end, the context is what proved who was correct on what they were saying. And that was you could not use an outside source to cast magic to the units that are in the reserve at your enemy. So basically you couldn't cast magic at the reserves. So a simple wording had a whole mishap, and there was a huge fucking argument for days and weeks until the developers came in and says, yeah, we worded that fucked up and stated we meant the units at the reserve can cast magic from it, but nobody outside it can cast magic into it. Simple. Solve the problem. Now, how that applies to Cadence is when used as their default weapon attack, people are interpreting what default weapon attack to mean as in the attack that can be used as a default attack, or an attack that can be used in place of your default weapon attack or replaced with. Now, I'm going to explain to you the context that this is in only means one thing. So I have a level 1. I'm going to show you what that means now. Alright, so I'm with my level 1, and I don't have any skills or anything. What I'm doing now, I'm attacking with my default weapon attack. This is your default weapon attack. That means this is the attack you start with. Now, when you're dealing with Cadence, and I'm going to go back in the game and show you that, it's actually saying Cadence becomes that attack you just saw me use at level 1. This does not mean replace that default weapon attack with Cadence. It literally states Cadence is that default attack. Now, while the context people read is that the default weapon attack is anything that can go into the left mouse button, this context is stating that Cadence becomes that first attack you use. Now, both parties were correct in their interpretation. The context that this is stating is literally stating that this attack cannot work because the context it's telling you to use the default weapon in can't be used. Now, again, this is not to tell anybody that they're right or wrong. This is showing you that what you interpret doesn't necessarily mean the context is correct. So, while that may sound stupid, it doesn't matter. Now, the way this should have been worded is that says when cadence cadence needs to be used in place of your default attack, or you replace your default attack with cadence. That would have solved the entire problem. But instead, they worded it so the interpretation can be taken two different ways, but the people were taking this out of context. So the context is cadence becomes that first attack. So when you're at level 1, you're using cadence. Instead of it means to replace whatever's in your left mouse button. So again, it's a little iffy, but I just wanted to show people where both sides were coming from. So I hope this helps people to learn, and hopefully people can stop arguing about stuff like this. Just step back, see what the other person's saying, and try to understand them. If you can't, don't bother arguing, because you're never going to agree to anything or see each other's sides. Steel Gamer signing off.